What if you could start a brand new career as an independent tech consultant? And what if that meant working less hours, having more job satisfaction, and growing your income? Well, all of that is possible if you know the right way to go about it. So in this episode, I'll be breaking down 5 steps to help you go from where you are now to starting your own tech consulting business. If we haven't met yet, my name is Michals, and I've had my own software consulting business for more than 2 decades. During that time, I've earned millions of dollars in income and been able to work on many rewarding projects for some amazing clients. And I believe you can do the same. The first thing you'll need to do, understand what you're passionate about. There's a quote that says, "Find a job you love and you'll never work a day the rest of your life." The reality is every job has difficult days. I believe the better thing to focus on is something from the Bible in Ecclesiastes. Chapter 2, verse 24 says, "A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil." I think the key is finding satisfaction in the work you do. And the key to satisfying work is 3 different things. If you bring all those 3 things together, that's where you're going to find the satisfaction. So this is something called a Venn diagram. The first circle of the Venn diagram is what you love to do. Some people call this your passion. It's a thing that you just can't wait to do. It's a thing that while you're doing it, time seems to fly. 4 hours will go by just like that, and you'll wonder where the time went. That's something that you would call your passion. The second circle in that Venn diagram would be what you're good at, your talent. These are things that either come easy for you, or maybe you spend a lot of time developing that talent, so you just work at a higher level in that area than most other people. And the third thing is what people will pay you for. And this is what's called the market. So where all of those 3 things come together, your passion, your talent, and what people will pay you for in the market, that I believe is where you will find satisfaction in your job. Now, this doesn't have to be a domain. In other words, it doesn't have to be a subject matter. It doesn't have to be you really love, let's say you love working with numbers and you really love accounting. Or let's say you just happen to love working in real estate. It doesn't have to be those kind of things. It could be something like you just love to create. Maybe where you would find satisfaction is being the creative who helps people solve their expensive problems, their big problems. That might be someone who maybe works in a marketing department, or maybe you just love working with people. So you maybe are a people person and you could use technology to help companies grow their revenue. But the thing you really love is helping people, working with people. The next thing before you start your tech consulting business, the next thing you want to think about is choosing the clients you want to serve. Who do you want to deal with? Who do you want to serve in your tech consulting? The thing is, you're going to be doing consulting work ultimately for people. Even if you're developing systems, even if you're creating infrastructure, even if you're writing code, ultimately the end user of that will be people. This means you'll be interacting with these people a lot. So make sure you don't pick people who you don't enjoy hanging around with. I don't know if you've ever heard it said, "I really found my people. These are my people." Try to think about those kind of people when you're thinking about what clients you want to serve. Another way to think about picking clients is one of 3 different categories. The first is clients who need work you've already done. This puts you in the role of an expert. You've already done this. Maybe you've had many years doing this kind of work. You're going to be able to serve those clients because they need something that you know how to do really well. There are other clients who may need work that you're currently doing. Maybe you haven't done it for that long. Maybe you're 6 months in, maybe you're a year in. Maybe it's something that you're kind of excited about, but you're working in currently. You really only need to be about 10 to 20% ahead of in your knowledge and skill level than your clients for them to really see you as a go-to person, for them to really see you as an expert. And the third kind of bucket of clients I think about are clients who need work in an area that you're interested in. Now, sometimes this comes about where you've already established a client relationship. You've already been doing work for a client. And during that time, you've gotten to know their systems. You've gotten to know all the people in their organization. They like working with you. you've gotten to know their domain, their industry, their vertical, they may be willing then to allow you to work on a project that you don't have experience in, but something you're really interested in, something you really feel some fire, some excitement for. They may be willing to let you pursue that project. I've been in that situation where we wanted to launch something brand new. In this particular case that I'm thinking about, my client wanted to launch a business intelligence project. I had no experience in that. But because I had done other work for them as a software developer over many years, and I knew their business, and I knew their systems, and I knew their databases, and I knew their domain, the area they worked in, they had faith that based on that past performance, I would be able to figure out this new technology. And I would also be the best person to put it together because I knew all those other pieces already. These areas could also be horizontals. Maybe this client is working with a technology that you've done. Maybe it's a front-end technology. Maybe it's a particular front-end framework, or maybe it's a database. In that case, you would be well positioned to be able to help that client. Don't rule anything out. For example, the first project that I ever worked on was something that I just loved to do. I played tennis in school. I loved tennis. There was a point in time where I ate, breathed, slept tennis. I was just all about tennis. My first project actually was about tennis. I was able to help out the tennis shop that I'd worked at during school and do a couple really cool projects for them, a couple software projects for them. Don't rule anything out. Even if it's a hobby, even if it's a pastime, there are industries that are built around that. So if you have a favorite hobby or a favorite pastime, kind of like I loved playing tennis, you might be able to find clients who you can serve in that area. The third thing you'll need to think about is the concept of your brand. Now, your brand is not your logo. Your brand is not your color scheme. Your brand is not your font type. Think about brand as what do you want people to associate with you? These can be one of two things generally. It can be gimmicky or it can be something meaningful. Here locally where I live, there was a jeweler who was in business for a long time. And part of his marketing was he had, from a mannequin, he had an arm and he had a leg. And he used to use that as his tagline for his business, is come to my jeweler shop where it won't cost you an arm and a leg. Memorable, but kind of gimmicky. Another time I remember going to a conference and there was a guy there who was well known for always wearing very bright multicolored pants wherever he went. So people always knew and couldn't forget this guy. Not a bad thing to be memorable, but I would encourage you to think about things that are more meaningful. And you can start with just asking yourself, what are your values? What are those things that you hold up as really important? For me, some of the things I think about in terms of my branding is I want people to associate with me. I want my clients to associate with me honesty. Someone who is always a trusted advisor. Someone who will speak the truth, good, bad, or ugly, to my client so that I can actually give them advice that they can rely on. Another thing I think about is integrity. Doing what I say, saying what I do. When it comes to integrity, I want them to know I'm going to follow through. I also want them to know that I'm not going to flake or I'm not going to disappear. Let's say the project's getting difficult. I will continue to communicate to them, keep that line of communication open, whether things are going well on the project or whether things aren't going so well on the project. A third thing that I think about that I want to be associated with my brand is excellence. And there's a difference between doing your best on something versus doing it the best it can be done. I want clients to associate with me doing something the best that can be done. And sometimes, to be honest, for me, that means I may have to rely on another resource. I may have to bring in a subcontractor on a project. Maybe that person is more skilled in a particular area than I am. And if I want the project to be done the best way it can be done, I may need to bring in those other resources to make sure that that's what I'm delivering to my client. When it comes to brand, your messaging should reflect your values. Your messaging is going to carry a lot of weight in establishing your brand. Your messaging could be simply emails back and forth to your client. It could be phone calls with your client. It could be Teams messages or Slack chats. It could also be what's on your website, just what you put in terms of copy and content on your website. You want all of that to make sure that that holistically represents your values. Branding is going to happen over time. It's not going to happen immediately, but it's going to happen over time with consistent messaging. So you want to make sure your messaging is on point and represents your values. Now, the fourth thing you want to think about before starting your tech consulting business is to determine your financial picture. What do your finances look like currently, and what do you want them to look like? When it comes to starting a tech consulting business, you have a few different options for startup. The first would be as a side hustle. Most people who start as a side hustle, they have their current job and they stay in their current job. And as they continue on in their current job, they start their tech consulting on the side. This is why it's called a side hustle. They may do it after hours or on weekends. Sometimes people call that moonlighting. But regardless of what name you give it, this would be where you continue in your current employment, and then you start by maybe picking up one project, and you do that after work. You do that a little bit on the weekends. You start that way and you see how it goes. That's actually a really good way to start your tech consulting. Another way to do it would be to try to save up 1 to 2 years of money that would cover your expenses before then going full time in your tech consulting business. Your mortgage, rent, car payments, food, transportation, clothing, all your basic expenses, health insurance and all that. You could pay for all of that for 2 years, and then you can start building your business, but you can do it full time, and you should be able to scale much more quickly. A third way, and this is very common in the quote unquote startup world, is to borrow money. This may come from angel investors. This may come from, in your case, maybe a family member. This could come from a bank loan. You could get a business loan from a bank. But the thing to keep in mind is that a lot of businesses don't make it. So think about the difference between saving up from 1 to 2 years of expenses and then getting to the end of that time where maybe you just decide you don't like consulting, or maybe you decide that it's just not working out financially for you and you have to go back and get a full-time job. At that point, all you've done is burn through your savings and you're back to basically zero, and now you just kind of continue on. Whereas if you've borrowed money, if you get to that same point 1 or 2 years in, and now you're not back to zero, now you're in the hole. Now you got to go back to work just to pay back those people who invested in you for your business that didn't work out. That's the main reason why I would not recommend borrowing money, is just because it's likely going to create a lot of financial pressure and stress for you, and that's not going to be fun. So after you started to think about how you would want to start up, make a budget. And this is going to be especially important if it comes to, you deciding to save up 1 or 2 years of expenses and then jump in full time. You're going to want to make sure that your budget includes all of your current expenses. Include everything that you currently spend money on, that currently goes out from your income, and make sure that that is a very detailed list. You're going to need that to be able to calculate how many expenses you have during those 1 to 2 years. Consider also that you're going to have startup costs. Let's say you're used to using a laptop that's provided by your employer. You're not going to be able to use that laptop for your side hustle or for your own tech consulting business. So you're going to have to allocate money to purchase a laptop. You may be using software that your current employer provides. You're not going to be able to do that when you start your own consulting business. You're going to need to pay for your own software, your own subscriptions. Those things you'll also need to make sure are included in your budget so you can understand how much it's going to cost you during this time to actually get started running your business, especially before you start bringing in any sort of income. Another thing that's really important to start thinking about is, how will you charge? Are you going to charge on a project basis? This would be where you agree to do a project for a client and you just charge them a flat fee. You basically say, this is the quote, just gonna be a flat fee. It's all inclusive. It's not going to change. In that case, you definitely want to make sure that you are very particular and very meticulous about outlining the scope of your project. That can be a good way to do projects. When you're first starting out, especially if you're first starting out with a technology, maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't really have any idea how long it's going to take. So you could fall back to hourly. And in that case, you're not really guaranteeing the client anything. You might give them a range. This might take anywhere from 100 to 200 hours, but you're going to bill them for every hour that you spend on them. It's not the greatest situation, but maybe at first, when you're first starting out, before you know much about how long something would take you to implement, maybe you'll need to do that for a while. And another way to think about project pricing is to do value-based pricing. It's a little bit more advanced, but for example, recently a potential client came to me and said, hey, we want to build out our homegrown database into a solution that will scale for us. And I had a conversation with them, just asked them a bunch of questions. And what I learned from that conversation is they're not going to get any positive ROI from that project. So in that case, I basically told them, I don't really want to do this project for you because your company is not going to benefit. Your business is not going to benefit. It may save you a few headaches here and there, but in the end, it's just going to be a cost center for you. You're spending money and you're not going to get any financial benefit from it. If you're doing value-based pricing, that would be clearly the case if you found that there is no value or there's negative value in the, so why would you do that? Positive example of value-based pricing is, let's say that same company is looking to grow, but in order to win certain contracts, they need some technology put in place that they don't currently have. Let's say putting that technology in place would allow them to get $1 million or $2 million worth of business over the next couple of years. If you do value-based pricing, it's a project you could easily charge $100,000 or $200,000 for, because if they're going to spend $100,000 or $200,000 on a technology that's going to allow them then to secure contracts that are worth $1 or $2 or more million, those are projects they'll do all day long. Spend $100,000, make $1 million. That's a no-brainer. So that's a positive example of value-based pricing. Another thing you want to think about is, how are you going to handle your profits? Are you going to take those profits and reinvest them back in the business to help grow your consulting? Or are you going to need to draw those profits just to meet your living expenses? Two different ways to do it. I would definitely encourage you to lean more toward the first, where you're taking those profits from your business, especially if you've already saved up money for your expenses over the course of 1 or 2 years. You can take those profits, reinvest them back into the business. Maybe in your case, it'll be investing in some skills training for yourself. Maybe hiring someone part-time or hiring an assistant. Maybe it would be investing in some new software. Whatever it is, you're putting money back into the business to help it to grow. Now, the fifth thing that you'll need to think about before you start your tech consulting business is what your business entity is going to be. The simplest form is really not an entity at all. It's just you. That's called a sole proprietor. If you are just holding yourself out as yourself, in my case, it would be Brandon Michals doing business with clients, there's nothing special that you need to set up. That's the simplest way to start up. It's the simplest way to move forward. There's really nothing at all you have to do. You can just immediately start. In that case, you could, if you wanted to. Some clients are going to ask you for a W-9, depending on how much the contracts are worth. They're going to need to issue you a 1099. That's an official tax form. And in that case, they would need either your social security number or an EIN. An EIN is an employer identification number. Should qualify all this by saying none of this is legal advice. None of this is tax advice or tax planning advice. This is strictly for the purposes of information and entertainment on this YouTube channel. I am a licensed attorney, but you are not my client. There is no attorney-client relationship here. I'm not giving you any legal advice. I'm just sharing you some of the things that I've gone through on my own. So I was able to get an EIN. And what the EIN allows you to do is it allows you to give that instead of your social security number. So you can protect your social security number, keep it private. EIN could also be useful in the future if you decide to change or actually form a business identity. You'll need it if you ever have employees someday. You will also need it if you're going to set up something like a solo 401k, so an individual 401k, something I would highly recommend that you consider doing, because it's a great way, and it's a great tax benefit too. It's a great way for you to make sure that you're not only earning income from your tech consulting, but you're also saving some of it for the future. As a sole proprietor, though, you can get an EIN. You can set up a bank account. I would encourage you to set up a separate bank account. Even if you're not going to do anything more than be a sole proprietor, set up a separate bank account just so you get in the practice of keeping your finances separated. That's something that would become more important if you do go on to form a more formal business entity. You can also do something called a DBA. That's a doing business as, or also called an assumed name certificate. In that case, you don't have to hold yourself out as just your name. You can come up with a business name. Maybe it's Database Solutions or Sam Software or something like that. You can then start representing yourself as that name and not just your own name. You can also, when you have a DBA, you can also get a bank account that has that company name on it. Another form of business entity is the LLC. You might have heard of this before. It's a limited liability company. Basically, the principle is if you form an LLC, if anything ever happens someday where someone did legal proceedings against you, they're not going to be able to touch your personal assets. They would only have access to whatever is in the LLC. So it's a good way to kind of separate your personal matters, your personal accounts and so forth from your business accounts. One of the benefits, especially if you do a single member LLC. So for example, I am a single member. I have a single member LLC. That's taxed the same as just an individual. Doing the single member LLC, it's fairly simple. LLCs do typically carry fees. Again, this is going to depend on the state. Where I live, there's a once every 2 years fee that I have to pay. It's very nominal. Some states, I believe, have an annual fee, and some states are very expensive. So just keep in mind that in some states anyways, it's still a good thing to have some kind of legal protection, but you're going to pay something for that, for the state to continue to recognize your LLC as an LLC. And another very common format, you might have heard this before, is the S corporation. It would really be done mainly for tax purposes. There are some benefits you can get from doing this if your income reaches a certain level. And the sixth thing, this is a bonus. I told you there were only 5. Sixth thing, but very important, is find a project. I like to think of this as launch and learn. Now, years ago, when I was working with a client, we used to do these things called lunch and learn. And what we would do is we would all read the same book, and then we would take turns presenting a chapter of that book at a monthly lunch. Acquiring knowledge is great. Reading is great. All of it is great. However, the truth is when you're reading, it's not the same as doing. When you're learning, it's not the same as doing. I like to say doing is always greater than studying. Studying something is going to give you principles. Doing is going to give you practicals. There's so many things that you're just never going to run across in a book that you will run into when you actually start doing projects. So again, as soon as possible, find a project. One way to find a project is to offer to do something for free for someone, for a company. I don't recommend doing work for free, but if you really want to start, really hit the ground running, if you really want to just find a project, most people will not say no to free work. I would encourage you to do something that's smaller, on a smaller scale. But doing something for free is a good way to get a real practical application of work in a real business setting. And the good thing about this is, yes, it's a quick way to gain experience. It's also free from some of the pressures that you may get if it's a paid. So it might be a good way just to get your feet wet in consulting, just to see, is this something you really enjoy doing? One way to think about doing it is to create a need. The way I started was I was working for the tennis shop, and I built them at the time a website. They needed some kind of an online presence. I love tennis. I love everything about it. I just wanted to do it for them. So I created a website for them. And in my case, they then offered to start paying me to maintain it. What you could also do if you create something for free, you could get them to a certain point, and then you can make an offer to say, hey, if you want to take this further, this is what I would charge. Another way you could get some work, get some experience on doing project work, would be to scratch your own itch. What I mean by that is some problem, some situations, something you've run into in the past that has just bugged you, something you wish there was a solution for. Go ahead and create the solution for it. This could be anything. Maybe you're working Excel and there's something you have to do all the time. And let me see if I can write some Visual Basic for Applications script. See if I can automate this thing. Something that you identified a problem with, because the truth is if you're having an issue with something, it's very likely that other people or many other people have that same issue. So that's one way to get some real world experience working on a project, even if it's only doing something for yourself. You can also start interviewing people in whatever niche you want to pursue, whatever clients you really want to serve. You can start interviewing those people to really understand what their pain points are. Understand what are the problems that you can solve in your tech consulting. Another way you can get started, good old-fashioned networking. Network. Start meeting people. Something they told us in law school when we were graduating, they said, make sure that you tell everyone you meet, doesn't matter who it is, everyone you meet, that you're graduating from law school, you're taking the bar exam, and you're going to be looking for a job in the legal profession. What that does is it starts associating in people's minds you with this particular work that you're looking for. The goal was with that, if someone found out, maybe they had a friend who was an attorney and maybe they were looking to hire an associate, or if they just heard of any sort of a job opportunity, they would then think of you and they would reach out to you. So in the same way, when you are networking and you let people know what you do, people are going to associate that in their mind. They're going to associate that with you. And then if they know someone who needs that kind of work that you do, they may reach out to you. If you're looking to start your own tech consulting business, leave me a comment below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.